So this will be our first lecture for the class. Pre-colonial America, that pretty much just means before Columbus arrives in 1492. So, as all of you guys know, there were people here in North America and South America before the arrival of Europeans. So the most popular theory on how people arrived in the Americas is through the land bridge theory. This is what will still be on your final exam. There are many other theories out there. However, this is the one accepted by most researchers. So, people migrated across the Bering Strait through Alaska and down through North America into Central America and then further south. These people that first came were mainly hunter-gatherers, hunting animals in North America. So they were seeking better hunting grounds is what pushed them into the Americas. Around 7,000 years ago, agriculture became mainstream in parts of North and South America, with Central America being the most agricultural. So, with agriculture, now you have cities that could become a lot larger. No longer did people have to move around and search for food. They can now stay in one spot and harvest their crops. So we see the development of major cities in Central America. Many of these cities, such as Tenochtitlan by the Aztecs, would have been bigger than Paris or Europe or London at the time. So one of the biggest cities in the world during this time. So these early civilizations, we're going to talk about 5 main civilizations. That'll be the Olmec, the Maya, the Aztec, the Toltec, and the Inca. And we'll talk a little bit about each one. But the oldest of these civilizations was by far the Olmecs. The oldest record of these civilizations comes from the Olmecs. They're often called the mother culture of the later civilizations, such as the Maya. So the Olmecs were fairly civilized. One of the main things that they're iconic for are these ginormous heads in which they carved, and nobody knows exactly what they represent. Most people agree that they probably represent chieftains, so somebody that would have ran a small village. But they were pretty sophisticated. They had writing systems. They studied art. So we're seeing the development of advanced civilizations in the Americas around 1500 BC. Then we have the Maya, who come along a little bit later, and the Maya are still around, even though it says that the civilization ended in 1100. People today still speak dialects of Mayan in southern Mexico and places like Guatemala and Honduras. But the Maya lost their position as the dominant culture to the Aztecs, and the Aztecs, as you can see, fell in 1521. So one of the things I want you guys to notice is when you see the dates for each of these 3 civilizations, you can tell the Olmecs and the Maya, they're those nice rounded off even numbers. And that's because those are approximations. However, when we get over to the Aztecs, you see a little bit more specific numbers. And one of the reasons that we know that the Aztec civilization fell in 1521 was because Hernan Cortez, who we'll talk about, was a Spanish explorer who actually overtook the Aztec Empire. The Aztecs did practice human sacrifice in order to please their gods, in order to have good harvest. They also practiced some animal sacrifices. So various religions here, but one of the craziest things that a lot of people like to study about the Aztecs is the human sacrifice aspect. Generally, the people that were sacrificed were people that were captured from, say, an enemy. So if the Aztec warriors, overtook another army, they would take those soldiers in and use them as human sacrifices. So the Aztecs were one of the biggest civilizations. Not quite as big as the Inca, but we'll get there. So after the Maya declined, a group of hunters known as the Aztecs began to wander through central Mexico. A lot of theories are kind of surround where did the Aztecs necessarily come from, but most believe they came from the north, coming from northern Mexico down further south. So the capital was Tenochtitlan, and this was built in the middle of a lake. So you can see, or you'll see an image of it on the next slide. Tenochtitlan is actually where present-day Mexico City is, which is the capital of Mexico today. So Tenochtitlan, workers had to, fill in land in order to make this island city in the middle of a lake. And it really was a good idea because all you had was 3 causeways, which is pretty much just a land bridge to connect an island. You only had 3 of those surrounding the city, so there's only 3 ways people could attack the city. It would be hard to float enough boats and over to the city to attack it. They would have plenty of time to prepare for an attack like that. However, was also a disadvantage because when Cortez overtakes the city, all he does is block off those 3 exits, and pretty much nobody can get food in or out, and he's able to starve out the city. And then we have the Inca. The Inca were the biggest as far as population and as far as land area. The Inca were the only one that we're going to be talking about that was actually in South America. These other civilizations were in Central America. So the Inca lived in the Andes Mountains, which is a mountain range that runs along the western edge of South America. This group declined the follow of the Incan instructions, the Incans will fall, as you can see, in 1538. Again, we see a specific date. That is when Spanish explorers started arriving on the coast and brought diseases that ultimately lead to the decline. We'll talk more about that in a later lecture. The Inca actually had a pretty unique method of writing. They used beads and strings in order to symbolize certain sounds. They also had calendars that were laid out in a similar fashion. So they had a very good understanding of astrology and had their own written language. The Hohokam, we're not going to talk extensively about them, but they lived in what is now present-day Oklahoma, so the western United States. They were a pretty big civilization, but declined rapidly due to a drought. They practiced advanced systems of irrigation and a lot of agriculture, and we'll see just exactly how much our agriculture today is dependent on how these Native Americans farmed. So we see the Anasazi, again around the same time as the Hohokam. They lived in the western United States. Really cool civilization, really cool places to visit. You can visit some of these very old Pueblo houses way out west in which they carved their houses literally out of the sides of the mountains. But this region of the United States used to get a lot more rain, but once it started to dry up, the crops started to dry up and people either had to move or they died of famine. And then we have the mound builders, and this is kind of more relevant to where we live in the United States. The mound builders were stretched along the Appalachian Mountains, going all the way up towards the Great Lakes. This civilization would build these great dirt mounds, unlike the Aztecs who built these huge pyramids out of stone. The mound builders we really don't know too much about because they were some of the first Native Americans to be wiped out by disease as European settlers settle along the eastern coast of the United States. Also, there's not a whole lot of evidence about this culture because through the Industrial Revolution, which started in the eastern United States and is very developed today, a lot of these mounds were just bulldozed over. People just thought they were just a random hill and bulldozed over a lot of these mounds created by the mound builders. However, Cahokia, which is in Illinois, you can go actually visit it today, is a mound over 100 feet high, and at its peak it was considered one of the biggest cities on the or near the eastern part of the United States. So if you ever get a chance and you're in Illinois, definitely visit this slide. It is worth your time. So that's where I'm going to end this slideshow. I don't want to make it too long, but I'm going to be talking about the conditions in Europe and Africa later on that lead to exploration and actually what pushed many Europeans to leave Europe and come to what would become the United States.